So, Brett Morgen, your new documentary, Jane, explores the early years of Jane Goodall's career and her life. Take us back to the beginning. What initially got you involved? What attracted you to this story?
Uh, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I was promoting a movie called Montage of Heck about Kurt Cobain when I received a call from National Geographic asking if I would be interested in doing a film about Jane. And I was very naive. I knew very little about Jane and did not spark initially to the idea. I just sort of assumed that there had been plenty of films made about Jane. And that was, again, just all naivete. I mean, there have been a lot of films about Jane, but not in the style that our Jane is created. So I went and looked at whatever work had been out there and realized that there was nothing that was immersive, nothing in the spirit or style that I tend to work in. The most prominent film was a documentary that was made in 1965 called Miss Goodall and the Chimpanzees. It's a film that Jane and Hugo, the cinematographer, totally reject, thought was filled with all sorts of inaccuracies, and really just hated it. And I just felt like this couldn't be the last word. That could not be the final word on Jane. After I looked at Hugo's footage, there was 140 hours of pristine 16 millimeter. And I read Jane's book, In the Shadow of Man. I realized that I had the elements, the visual elements at hand to help bring Jane's seminal book to life. And that's really what the movie Jane is. It's very much a retelling of In the Shadow of Man, her incredible book. In fact, I wanted to call the movie In the Shadow of Man, and it was called that until about a month before the premiere. But some people got nervous about that it would be read wrong. To me, it was the most obvious double entendre, because when Jane wrote the book, In the Shadow of Man, it was about the chimpanzees. She was referring to the chimpanzees, but I kind of liked it as referring to Jane, who was in the shadow of Leakey and Hugo and all these men, and eventually, comes out of that.
Mm-hmm. It's truly amazing footage. I mean, I wonder how you were able to talk about sifting through all of it and, comprising it into a narrative. I mean, whittling it all down to just 90 minutes.
Well, the footage was it was very well preserved in terms of scratches and sort of damage, but the colors had faded quite a bit. The biggest problem was it was 140 hours of random shots. We weren't given camera reels as such. I certainly expected that I was going to sit down and watch reel 1 through reel 300. And 5 minutes in, it became clear to my editor and I that what we were looking at wasn't even a selects reel. It was just randomly thrown together at some point back in the 60s. So it was very abstract. I had to, at that point, shut down the production. Based upon my own initial research about Jane, I was able to sort the footage, bring a team in to sort the footage into various categories. So we took all the footage of Jane and isolated it, took all the footage of chimps eating and isolated that, et cetera, et cetera. The narrative, I would say most of the work I did on the narrative was probably done from reading Jane's books. Once I started screening footage, I had a fairly good idea of where the film was going to go. I knew it was a love story. I think that the final thing for me was understanding that it was a love story about a woman and her work, as opposed to a woman and her man. And to be honest, when I set out to make the film, it was more of a Jane and Hugo film. And as I started to go deeper and deeper into it, I felt that it really was, it was Jane's movie that I was really, needed to hang on to. But the movie as it exists today is really a testament to these two pioneers in their field.
And I mean, going off of the fact that this is Jane's story, interspersed throughout the movie, you have an interview with Jane Goodall. You're hearing her voice constantly talking about her experiences, recollecting on her past. Can you talk about sitting down and talking with her? How did you prepare for that? What was that like?
Well, I do my interviews. Well, I saying like I do it a lot. I've only done interviews one other movie, Montage of Heck, or on-camera interviews. I'm not a big fan of talking heads in general. Because I find that oftentimes in nonfiction they're used because there's nothing else to show. or at least that's how it was traditionally and historically, I think, when I first got into the field. So I've always had an aversion to it. The other thing is that I believe that one needs to, as a director, needs to manage every moment of the film. And the way that interviews are conducted for documentaries, oftentimes, all the time, one sets up a camera, conducts an interview, maybe pushes in and out, with changes the focal length, but rarely, if ever, change the lighting or the compositional intent. I believe that whatever someone is saying or doing, the director's job is to embellish, is to find a visual language to represent that sentiment. So that you can't just keep the same shot for everything that someone's going to say. If someone's saying something about a joyous discovery, it should be shot and framed and lit this way. If they're talking about something tragic, it should be shot and framed and lit this way. I think it's a mistake that the documentary discourse has evolved the way it has. Now, there's a reason for it. You have to know where you're going. So I had the advantage of having already edited the film. So I was able to structure my interview with Jane, having a deep sense of what I needed to get from her, and was able to communicate that to Ellen Kiris, the cinematographer, and Ian Kincaid, the gaffer, so that we can light the interview so that it would go from morning light into deep evening light, and then turn the next day into like a resurrected lighting. I can tell you that 75% of the film was shot at the wrong hour of the day, meaning we were shooting the nighttime stuff in daylight and the daytime stuff at nighttime, just as it worked out. But you can only really do this after you've shot the film. I mean, the same thing was a montage of Heck. We went, from Kurt's mom in the morning light to Courtney deep into the evening at the Chateau Marmont. And you want to take that? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
I can hear. I can hear you. Yeah. What we just want to pick up where you left off?
Oh, I think I finished my thought. I was just waiting for you to come back online.
Sorry. Yeah. No. You froze up, and I just
Oh, do you know where I froze?
I don't remember. No. You were talking about shooting the daylight stuff at night and the nighttime stuff.
Oh, yeah. What I was going to say is that this idea was inspired by the movie Lenny.
Oh, okay.
So go figure that, like, my inspiration for shooting documentaries is from a movie, a fiction film that pretended to shoot interviews. But if you remember the movie Lenny, all the interviews go from day into night, and you get the sense that the subject is sitting there for a long period of time telling their story, which I really love. I love that kind of motif.
Throughout the movie, you also have this score by Philip Glass. Can you talk a bit about that? It's very reminiscent of his work in Koyaanisqatsi and things like that. What did that music add to the movie?
I think it's a very different score for Philip, in the sense that the movie's a narrative. Koyaanisqatsi is an essay, and I would say that of Philip's documentaries, most of them don't tend to be as narratively focused and derived as Jane, which made it more akin to opera than film score, because we needed recurring motifs and themes, and to be able to work towards them and away from them. I brought Philip in 2.5 years ago as soon as I was hired to direct the film. None of the footage had any sound elements on it. It was all MOS. And at that point, with the goal of wanting to make this immersive movie, I thought that we would sort of conceive it like a cinematic opera, and we would have music from first frame to last frame. And I asked Philip to write an opera for Jane's life, basically. So it was always intended. Some people say to me that, wow, the music is really mixed loud. And I was like, we got to understand that's how it was designed, is that the music's not supposed to be supporting the way music is. Music is the lead voice of the film. It's the narration, if you will. One of the things I loved was Philip and Jane are from the same generation. And I love these two icons in their 9th decade who are still doing extraordinary work, who basically defined and redefined their respective fields, coming together at this stage of their lives to do this film. I think Philip, it was a much more challenging job than he expected. I think he was expecting 2 months of composition, and it became 6.5 months of composition. I think, from our first initial calls, he probably thought I was going to be a little easier to work with than I probably ended up being. But I think we're both happy with where we arrived. I know he is. I don't think he expected. Philip doesn't do anything that I know of for commercial. I mean, maybe he does do something for commercial, but he certainly didn't do Jane for any commercial prospects. And we had a LA premiere at the Hollywood Bowl, which was for 18,000 people. We sold it out. Philip had never. I think his largest crowd, he told me, at the Hollywood Bowl was 8,000 people. And so he couldn't believe it. And we were on the red carpet, and we sort of huddled, and we were watching Jane take pictures. And he comes up to me and goes, "Can you believe this?" And I was like, "No, can you?" And he's like, "No, this is incredible." and I was like, "It's Jane." And he's like, "I know, it's amazing." And no, I think he really is very happy with how things ended up becoming. And personally, I think it's Philip's. I do think it's his best score, or if not his best score, one of his best scores, because of the fact that it's narratively oriented, and I allowed him to be the lead. It wasn't bearing it. Do you want to know a side note, since you are Gold Derby?
Sure, yeah.
Do you know how many documentaries have been nominated for original score?
Not off the top of my head, no. I don't know if there's any.
0.
Yeah.
It's amazing, because it's like one of the few. First of all, music in nonfiction films is probably more important, or used more in a more significant way than fiction. And I'm going to say that because we, as particularly in today's era, since Errol Morris, we lay down music. Before Errol, and the Disney films, they're all wall-to-wall music. Think of the original Disney nature films; it's just floor to floor, wall-to-wall. It's incredible to me that the music branch has never honored a documentary score. And we could think of stuff like, Philip, to me, should have, coined a Scotsy. I don't know what was nominated in that year that he was overlooked, but it is kind of extraordinary.
Well, hopefully one day that will change. So FYC, music branch of the Academy. I wanted to ask you, throughout your career, you've made documentaries on a wide range of subjects. Jane Goodall, Kurt Cobain, you mentioned, Robert Evans, Roy Jones Jr., the Chicago 10. It's such a wide variety of people. What attracts you to tell the stories of these people?
A lot of it is to do with what I'm going through in my life at that time, or at least that's how the films end up. It may not be why I came into them, but I could certainly tell you that by the time I'm done, they're a mirrored reflection of whatever I'm going through, my own psychological journey, if you will. I think that there's, people don't want to acknowledge this, but all film is a reflection of the artist, not the subject. Okay. If I take 50 people and ask them to make a portrait of Paul Revere, they're not telling me anything about Paul Revere. They're revealing something about themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So, Bob, my film about Bob was in many ways, in the Stones and Abbey, I thought was really me trying to understand, maybe looking for a father figure to a certain extent. I think Kurt was very much about the mom. The whole movie to me is about Kurt's mom. Jane came to me at a time in my life where I could not have made this film 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I would not have been attuned to it, aware of it, able to listen to it and understand it, both the messaging and the style of it. This film demanded I be more restrained than I've ever been as a filmmaker, even though if you look at the film, sometimes people say it's not, but for me, I think it is. I'm certainly drawn to characters who live life by their own rules. That's definitely something I'm interested in. But I have to see what elements I have to work with. That's a big draw for me, because I sort of feel that once I get into it, I'm going to fashion into whatever it is per our previous point. So when I go into it, I got to see what we have to tell the story. Now, oftentimes, not having stuff is an advantage. It wasn't Kurt. We had no footage in Montage of Heck. If you take out the Nirvana on stage footage, that movie probably had 5 hours of footage. I mean, there was nothing to, I mean, I almost pulled out of that film because I was like, how am I going to make this film? I don't have anything to make this film with. But I knew that was going to make it visually exciting, that there was certainly a challenge. And in that context, I looked to his art, and I looked to ephemera, and I looked to other elements that help bring that story to life. With Jane, when I saw Hugo's footage, I knew that I had not just his footage of Jane, but I discovered this footage he shot of insects for a movie called that was never made or released, called The Insects of Dombey. And I was like, I can use this to help present my portrait of Eden. I had not just visual documentation, but there was a visual poetry that matched and mirrored the prose and the poetic nature of Jane's writing. So I felt that there was a lyrical feeling that I was going to be able to express in this story that I wasn't, just because of the way the material presented itself to us. You know, I think it's very important for archive filmmakers that you have to sort of make the story. You can't write the script until you know what material you have to work with, and then you have to sort of connect the dots and go, okay, this is what I have to work with. What's the best story that can be told using these elements?
Mm-hmm. And for your work, you've received an Oscar nomination for your film On the Ropes and 4 Emmy nominations for Cobain, Montage of Heck. What has that recognition meant for you?
Well, On the Ropes was, it was a great way to start your career. I'll tell you that much. I mean, it was, we were On the Ropes was my thesis film at NYU. I remember and by the way, it was such a different game back then. I was just on the net last week, and we were talking about how we didn't do anything except show up at the Oscars. Like, there was no luncheons, there were no receptions, there was no Gold Derby, there just wasn't. You made the film, you hope for the best. We didn't know anybody. We were film students, and so it was. I'll tell you, it was wonderful to be able to knock off a bunch of stuff from your bucket list before you even started your career.
Mm-hmm. Are you still there? I think you froze again.
Your network connection. There you go. Here you go. So anyway, I think that what I was saying was, I think awards tend to matter a little more for documentarians than our fiction brethren, because they can be compensated through financial means, and documentarians really don't. But I gotta say, I haven't really won an award since On the Ropes, and I've had a tremendous. I wouldn't change a thing. I think oftentimes awards, particularly in documentary, have a lot to do with the subject matter. And, a film on Kurt Cobain certainly is not designed or intended to ever be an awards film. We were shocked that we received 7 Emmy nominations for that film. So yeah, I am blessed beyond belief. The rewards, not awards, but the rewards I've received from this vocation have been unlimited. And the joy and the satisfaction for me is doing these stories. I mean, Jane was never intended to really be seen in a theater. I mean, when we started the film, it was going to be this little side project I was going to do over the course of 5 or 6 months, and it took on a life of its own. And when we went to the Toronto Film Festival, we avoided pre-screening the film to anyone. The publicists on the film wanted to get into those advanced stories, like the buzz stories. And I was like, who cares? Let's just go there. Let's show the film and let's see what happens. And, that was probably one of the most rewarding moments of my life, when you expect nothing, and then we were at the premiere of Toronto, the movie cut to black, the entire audience rose before the first credit came on screen and stood there for 8 minutes. And I looked at Jane and we were just shocked, and it's kind of been that way with this film. I mean, the whole experience has so been beyond whatever we possibly were hoping for. and the fact that audiences have been discovering it in movie theaters, this will be my highest grossing documentary in the States, is that to me is exciting. That to me is a thrill, because I got into documentary over 25 years ago for the sole purpose of making theatrical nonfiction movies. There's a lot of talk now about what is theatrical and what is not theatrical. I'm not confused at all by what's theatrical and what's not theatrical. It seems very clear to me what's theatrical and not theatrical. It seems when people are four-walling theaters, it's not theatrical. But more than that, aesthetically, you know, we spent 2.5 years on sound editing on Jane in a 7.1 room. Nobody has 7.1 on television, or maybe they do. But the point is that we were designing an immersive kind of experience. And I think that, yeah, I think that you know, and listen, these aren't great times for theatrical documentary. You know, I think some of my peers are mistaken that this is a golden age of documentary. It may be a golden age of documentary if you don't distinguish the platform, you know, but for theatrical documentary, this is not the golden age. There have probably been fewer films that gross $1 million in 2017 than in most of the years past that I can think of, documentaries, which has always been sort of the benchmark. I think there's only been 4 or 5 this year. When I think of the golden age of documentary, I think of 2003, 2004, 2005. It started with, I mean, Kid Sees the Picture came out in 2002. We broke an existing box office per screen average when we opened. And then Michael Moore came out 3 months later and obliterated it. And with Bowling for Columbine. And there was that period there from 2003 probably to Inconvenient Truth, maybe even to Man on Wire, where every year there were documentaries that were grossing 2, 3, 75 million, 100 million. I mean, that was amazing. Wing Migration, you know, March of the Penguins. I mean, that was an incredible time. Spellbound was doing what, 4, 5, 6 million. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was amazing what was happening then. It's a bit sad to me what's going on right now. You know, and I think what it is, I mean, I can tell you because I'm experiencing it firsthand. It's the studios have so much clout over the smaller distributors that we've been, with Jane, we have had the #1 film in theaters like the Kabuki that are an 8-plex. In San Francisco, we had #1 film 2 weeks in a row and got kicked out on the 3rd week because A24 needed Lady Bird to be on 3 or 4 screens and have the leverage to push us off. And with all due respect to them, I am not saying anything bad about A24. They're doing what they need to be doing. But it's very difficult now to secure and hold screens for smaller films, which I got to tell you is a bit of a problem.
Well, it's a great movie, and I agree with you. I think that documentaries, theatrical documentaries, certainly deserve to have audiences, and I'm happy that people like yourself are still fighting the good fight for them. Brett Morgen, thank you so much. Congratulations on the movie.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Have a good one. Thanks.